4 words. That is all it reportedly took to close a door that had stayed open since 1997. I am not an ATM. That is the phrase now circulating out of London, attributed to Elton John, relayed by people close to him, and aimed, according to the reporting, directly at Prince Harry. Not a tabloid, not the palace, not a courtier, Elton. The man who sat at the piano in Westminster Abbey and rewrote his own biggest song in real time for a funeral watched by 2 billion people. And here is the loop I want you to hold all the way to the end, because I promise to pay it off completely. This did not break over one bad week. Friendships that are 3 decades deep do not shatter over a single rejection. They shatter because of what that rejection finally reveals about a much longer pattern, one that had been quietly building underneath the whole time. So the real question is not why Elton said no. The real question is what that no exposes about everything that came before it. Stay with me, because by the end of this, I think you will see that the most devastating thing that happened to Harry this month was not a £50 million legal bill. It was 4 words from a half-blind man in his late 70s who had loved him since he was a boy. And here is why I keep circling back to those 4 words, because there is a strange psychology buried inside them that I want you to notice. I am not an ATM is not the language of a business dispute. Nobody says that to a colleague or a stranger or a charity that cold called them. You only say I am not an ATM to someone who had started to treat you as one. The phrase itself contains the entire tragedy. It is the sentence of a man who realized, somewhere along the way, that his role in another person's life had quietly been reduced from father figure to funding source. And the moment you understand that the rejection was never really about a single request for money. It was about a man refusing, finally, to keep being the thing he had been turned into. Let me build this properly, because it deserves genuine context and not a compressed viral headline. To understand why this rejection apparently landed the way it did, you have to understand something first. This was never a normal celebrity friendship. It was not built on proximity, on being at the same parties, on the occasional photograph together. Elton's affection for Diana was real, and it was sustained for years before she ever died. It was not one of those friendships that conveniently deepens in the emotional aftermath of a tragedy once the cameras arrive, and there is something to be gained from proximity to grief. It predated all of that. And when she died, he did something almost nobody in his position would have had the composure to do. He rewrote his single most recognizable song specifically to sing at her funeral. He performed it in front of what was, at the time, the largest television audience in human history. And he somehow held himself together through the entire thing while the camera stayed locked on his face, waiting for him to break. That performance of Candle in the Wind raised more than $47 million for her memorial fund. And here is the detail that tells you who he actually is. He never sang that version publicly again. Not once. Not in nearly 3 decades since. He said more than once that from that moment on, the song belonged only to her. I want you to really picture that Abbey for a second, because we say the words Diana's funeral so often that they have gone flat, and the actual scene has been sanded down into a fact. Put yourself back in it. September. The stone of Westminster Abbey. A coffin. 2 boys, one of them 12 years old, walking behind it in front of the entire watching planet. And a man at a piano who had known the woman in that coffin, laughed with her, been her friend, now asked to sit in that unbearable room and perform. Not grieve privately, like everyone else. Perform. On cue, without cracking, while 2 billion people watched to see whether he would. He did not crack. He got through it. And then he took the thing he had just done, the rewritten song, the version the whole world now associates with that day, and he locked it in a drawer for the rest of his life, because he decided it was hers and not the public's. That is a specific kind of person. That is someone with an almost fierce sense of what is sacred and what is for sale. Hold that thought, because it becomes the whole key to understanding his anger now. A man who guarded a song that carefully was never going to be comfortable being treated as an open account. Sit with that for a second. A man at the peak of his fame took his most famous work, gave it to a dead friend, and then sealed it away forever. That is not a business relationship. That is not a networking connection. That is love, and it is the specific, protective kind. In the years that followed her death, Elton reportedly stayed genuinely present in the lives of her two young sons, not as a distant well-wisher who sends a card at Christmas, as an actual ongoing presence woven into their upbringing during exactly the period when they needed that kind of steadiness most. His husband, David Furnish, described him at one point in a formal sworn statement as a parental figure specifically to Harry. Stop and really hear that phrase, a parental figure. That is not language people use loosely about a friendly acquaintance. That is language reserved for someone who genuinely stepped into the space left behind by an enormous, irreplaceable loss. There is one specific moment from 2007 that I think tells you almost everything about the true shape of this relationship, long before any of the current controversy existed. Harry, still young, still carrying a grief that had never really settled, asked Elton whether he would perform Candle in the Wind one more time at a concert being organized specifically in his mother's memory. And Elton declined. Not out of any reluctance to help. He declined because he judged the song itself too raw, too tied to something that still needed protecting rather than performed for an audience. So he played your song instead and let that carry the moment differently. Read what is happening in that small scene, because it is the whole story in miniature. Long before anything currently being argued about online, Elton was already functioning as the adult in the room, shielding a young man from his own grief rather than putting it on public display, making the harder, wiser call and absorbing whatever disappointment came with it. Harry understood exactly what this man represented to him, and he said so in his own writing. In his memoir, he described Elton with a tenderness that reads as genuinely unguarded rather than performed for the page. "I loved him," he wrote, "I will always love him." Those are Harry's own words, and they matter enormously for understanding the weight of what has apparently happened since. And there is a bitter irony sitting right there that I do not want to skate past. That memoir, the one containing those tender words about Elton, was itself part of the machine that has left Harry where he now is. It was a one-time payout, a single, enormous check, rather than a lasting stream of income. And more than that, it was a document that spent its pages settling scores, airing the family's most private moments, turning relationships into content. The same book that told the world I loved him about Elton was the same book that demonstrated chapter after chapter exactly how freely Harry was now willing to convert the people in his life into material and money. You cannot fully separate the tenderness from the transaction because they arrived bound together in the same volume, and I suspect a man as protective of what is sacred as Elton noticed that. Notice that even love, in Harry's new world, tended to come with a price tag attached somewhere. The public evidence of this bond kept stacking up over the years too. Elton showed up at the royal wedding in 2018, instantly recognizable in his signature pink glasses, up out of his seat at the reception, performing Tiny Dancer for the grandson of the woman he had loved for decades. A year later, when the press turned hard against Harry and Meghan following their departure from royal duties, Elton did not stay quiet. He did not wait for carefully worded legal language from a publicist. Within hours, he issued his own signed statement, saying he felt a genuine and deep obligation to shield Harry's family from exactly the kind of press intrusion that, in his stated view, had directly contributed to Diana's death decades earlier. Notice the through line in everything he did, because it is the same instinct every single time. At the funeral, he protected the song. At the 2007 concert, he protected the boy from his own grief. In 2019, he stepped in front of the press on the family's behalf. Over and over, across more than 2 decades, Elton's role in this story is the same. He is the shield. He is the one who puts himself between Harry and whatever is coming for him. And that is exactly what makes the current moment so jarring. Because for the first time in the entire arc of this relationship, Elton is not standing in front of Harry protecting him from something. He has stepped to the side. And when the person whose defining role in your life was protector quietly stops protecting, That is not a small adjustment. That is the ground shifting under the whole thing. That is not how a fair-weather friend behaves. That is a man repeatedly, publicly placing himself between another person's child and the world, consistently, across roughly 30 years, without ever needing to be asked twice. Which is precisely why, when word started spreading this week about how that same man is apparently talking now, so many people who have followed this relationship closely sat up and paid attention. So let me get to the part that is not speculation at all, the part sitting in cold print across a 436-page court judgment, because this is where it turns genuinely serious. 8 days ago, a high court judge worked through Harry's major privacy case against the Daily Mail's publisher and rejected the entire thing outright, 97 individual claims, every single one dismissed. And Harry was far from the only person named on that case. He had assembled a genuinely notable group of co-claimants standing alongside him. Baroness Doreen Lawrence, Elizabeth Hurley, Sadie Frost, and yes, both Elton John and David Furnish listed right there on the same claimant paperwork. They lost together, as a group, all at once. Now, losing a case of this size in a British court does not simply mean walking away with bruised pride. It typically means contributing toward the winning side's legal costs on top of your own. The publisher's team has reportedly put that combined figure above £50 million, and by several accounts, the paper's former editor could barely contain his satisfaction once the ruling came down. And I want to flag something about how a defeat like this actually works, because it is worse than a simple loss, and most coverage does not explain why. When a business fails, you close it and you walk away. When a deal collapses, you shake hands and you move on. But a cost order in a case like this does not let anyone walk away. It follows every name on the paperwork. It is not a door closing behind you. It is a rope tied to your ankle, and on the other end of that rope sits the exact institution the case was built to fight. Which means Elton, a man who joined this thing out of loyalty to Diana's son, could end up personally writing a check to the very publisher he signed on to oppose. There is no version of that outcome that does not sting, and there is no interview, no documentary, no clever statement that makes a court-ordered debt disappear. Here is the genuinely uncomfortable mechanic behind exactly how a case like this works in practice, and I think it is worth explaining properly rather than rushing past it toward the more dramatic parts. Several of the co-claimants were reportedly told at the very outset that they would personally never be liable for the costs, Baroness Lawrence reportedly among them, and according to the reporting on the arrangement, Elton and Harry told the rest of the group not to worry, that the two of them would personally absorb the costs if things went badly. Well, the costs have now arrived, in full, and think for a second about what that promise actually meant to the people who heard it. When Harry and Elton reportedly reassured the rest of the group not to worry that the two of them would cover any costs, those were not idle words. Other people made real decisions on the strength of them. They lent their names to a high-profile case against a powerful publisher on the understanding that the financial risk sat with the two men who could most afford it. That is a serious thing to promise, and a serious thing to rely on. And now half of that promise, the Harry half, appears to be hollow because the money to back it simply is not there. Which does not just leave Elton exposed. It quietly changes what his own reassurance meant, because a joint promise is only as good as its weaker half. He may have vouched, in good faith, for a guarantee that he is now going to have to honor almost entirely by himself. There are few faster ways to sour a 30-year friendship than to discover that a promise you made together has become a promise you must keep alone. And Harry, whatever his public positioning might suggest, does not actually have that kind of liquid money sitting available, which leaves exactly one person in that entire group with the resources to genuinely cover it, and it is not the prince. Do you see the trap closing? Do you see how a promise made confidently at the start of a case becomes a very different thing at the end of it, once the confidence has been shredded by a judge? Elton did not just lend his name to a cause. He may have quietly co-signed a catastrophe. How did Harry actually respond to the verdict once it came down? By virtually every available account, not well at all. He left the courtroom and publicly called the ruling a complete whitewash. His own word, aimed squarely at a judge who had just spent 400 pages carefully explaining the reasoning behind every single finding. And here is a detail worth flagging. Multiple senior lawyers had reportedly warned him privately, well ahead of the trial, that this specific case carried a very high risk of failure under the applicable legal standard. He proceeded anyway. He lost about as publicly as it is possible to lose, and then he turned around and blamed the judge for the outcome. And this is where I have to plant my own flag and push against the way most people are framing this, because I think the whitewash reaction is the most revealing thing Harry did all month, and almost nobody is reading it correctly. Everyone is treating it as him lashing out, which it is, but look one layer deeper at what it actually assumes. To call a 400-page reasoned judgment a whitewash is to assume that the truth was so obvious, so self-evidently on your side, that the only possible explanation for losing is that the system itself is corrupt. That is not the reaction of a man who weighed the evidence and came up short. That is the reaction of a man who genuinely believed his own account was the account, that his sincerity was itself a form of proof, and who therefore cannot process a loss as anything other than a conspiracy against him. And that specific mindset, I would argue, is exactly the thing that has been quietly costing him friends for years. Because a person who cannot lose gracefully is a person who, sooner or later, makes everyone around him responsible for his defeats, including the ones who only ever tried to help. Now, here is the specific detail that I genuinely think matters more than almost anything else in this entire story, and one that most mainstream coverage has completely missed or failed to flag properly. When Harry released that furious public statement attacking the judge directly, one specific name was conspicuously absent from it entirely. Elton's. The same friend who had helped fund and support the case would not attach his own name anywhere near Harry's public criticism of the court. Think about what that silence actually communicates. When you have stood beside someone for 30 years and you suddenly decline to stand beside them in the one public statement that matters most, that is not an accident. That is a message. A quiet one, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Draw your own honest conclusions from that specific detail. I already have mine, and I suspect you might arrive somewhere similar once you sit with it. Now, here is the actual pivot point of this entire story. The specific moment everything before and after genuinely turns on. Losing the legal case was clearly one significant thing on its own, but Harry reportedly did not travel to Britain this particular summer purely to lose in court. He came, according to multiple reports, actively looking for donations toward a separate and entirely unrelated cause. The Invictus Games are set for Birmingham in 2027, and the reported shortfall sitting against that event is a genuinely striking £25 million. Organizers had secured roughly £4 million on top of an existing government grant. And this specific visit was reportedly supposed to be the moment Harry personally persuaded wealthy, loyal contacts to close that enormous gap. They did not open their wallets, including, apparently, the single most generous person he had ever had access to across his entire adult life, his own mother's closest friend. And I want to pause on the cause itself for a moment, because there is a genuine casualty here that gets lost underneath all the drama about money and friendship, and it deserves to be named plainly. Invictus is good. The biographer critics, the royal commentators, even the people most hostile to Harry personally, almost all of them stop short when it comes to Invictus, because it is genuinely difficult to attack. It is a games built for wounded servicemen and servicewomen, people who gave parts of their bodies and their minds in uniform, and who found in this event a reason to train, to compete, to rebuild. The athletes heading to Birmingham did not sign up to be collateral in a family drama. They qualified, they built an entire competitive year around it. And a £25 million shortfall is not an abstract number to them. It is the difference between the games they were promised and a diminished version of it. So when the fundraising trip becomes a story about lawsuits and rejected phone calls instead of a story about them, they are the ones who quietly lose. That is the part of this that genuinely bothers me, whatever anyone thinks of the prince at the center of it. And here is the detail that lands hardest of anything in this story once you actually line the full timeline up properly and see it in sequence. Harry had already pulled Elton into a £50 million legal disaster. Elton was already facing his own personal share of that bill. And knowing all of that, Harry reportedly went back to the exact same man and asked him to help fund Invictus. On top of everything already owed, the audacity of that specific sequence is genuinely difficult to overstate once you see it laid out in order. Ask yourself honestly how you would receive that call. A friend has just cost you millions through a case you were talked into joining. The ink on that disaster is barely dry. And the phone rings again, and it is the same friend asking for more. And I think there is something worth understanding about how a person even arrives at the point of making that second call. Because from the outside, it looks like pure nerve, and I am not sure that is the whole truth. When you have spent your entire life inside a world where money simply appears, where the machinery of an institution or an inheritance quietly handles the bills, you can lose the ordinary person's instinct for what a request actually costs the person receiving it. You stop hearing your own ask as an imposition, because for most of your life, asking and receiving were the same motion. I genuinely think part of what has gone wrong for Harry is that he may not fully register the weight of what he is asking, because he has never had to. The line he reportedly used about himself once, that he had gone from the Bank of England to the Bank of Elton, is revealing precisely because it treats a person as an institution. It is a joke, but it is the kind of joke that shows you how someone actually sees the world, and Elton, I suspect, heard that framing long before he ever said the 4 words back. Elton said no. And here is the part that reveals how clearly he was reading the situation. He reportedly said no, even before the judge had formally ruled on the Daily Mail case. He saw, earlier than most people around this whole situation, exactly which direction things were heading. Several commentators have described the dynamic more bluntly still, that the so-called Bank of Elton, after years of quietly funding various causes connected to this family, has now formally closed its account. And Elton, according to multiple separate sources, is not simply finished entertaining requests. He is reportedly genuinely angry. Angry that a legal case he arguably never should have been persuaded to join is now going to cost him millions of pounds of his own personal money, layered on top of everything else. It is genuinely difficult to argue that he does not have grounds for that anger. This is where you start to see, laid out in cold and specific numbers rather than emotional framing, exactly how much ground has actually shifted underneath Harry's public position over these past several weeks. One person who has followed this family closely for years described the past several weeks as Harry's worst stretch in 3 decades. And for once, that framing does not feel like exaggeration for effect. Because despite the widely reported Netflix money, the Spotify deal before it quietly wound down, and a memoir that reportedly sold millions of copies within weeks of release, detailed reporting on Harry's actual personal finances paints a considerably less comfortable picture than most outside observers probably assume. His own personal fortune, money that is genuinely his, separate from any commercial venture, reportedly sits somewhere around $22 million. And here is the part that I find quietly poignant, in a way the rest of this story is not. The overwhelming majority of that figure traces directly back to inheritance, his mother's estate, and his great-grandmother's. Sit with the strange gravity of that for a moment. In a very real sense, Diana and the late Queen are, from beyond their own lifetimes, still keeping their boy financially afloat. The women he has lost are the ones still holding him up, and the man his mother trusted most is the one who just stepped back. There is a quiet, almost unbearable symmetry in that arrangement once you really look at it. The 2 women who defined his early life, one his mother, one his great-grandmother, are still, through their estates, paying to keep the lights on in California. They cannot say no. The dead never can. Their money simply flows forward, obligation-free, no phone call required, no request that has to be weighed and judged. And standing in contrast to that is Elton, the living representative of Diana's love, the one person left who could have chosen to keep giving in her memory, and who has now, apparently, chosen not to. The dead keep giving because they have no choice. The living one stopped because he finally made one. If you want a single image that captures where Harry actually stands right now, it is that. Propped up by the generosity of the departed and quietly cut off by the generosity of the one who remains. That inheritance is reportedly draining at a genuine pace, too. Given the security costs he covers personally, the mortgage on the California property, and the ongoing staff required to run that household, this year alone is reportedly costing him upward of $6 million. He separately lost a court fight over his security arrangements in Britain and reportedly owes close to another $1.5 million connected specifically to that case. This is a man who appeared on a podcast interview just last week and was asked about as simple and straightforward a question as exists anywhere in ordinary conversation. What do you actually do for a living? And by any honest account of that exchange, could not produce a clean or confident answer. He worked through Prince, then Veteran, then Dad, before eventually settling on Duke, as though a title were itself a job, with daily responsibilities attached. It is a genuinely strange moment to watch back, and the friends, from what is being reported, appear to be quietly running their own calculations and heading toward the exit at roughly the same time. This particular pattern has actually become recognizable and common enough at this point that the commentary circulating around it has developed its own shorthand term for the phenomenon. You begin as one of their most visible and enthusiastic champions. Something shifts somewhere along the way, and without much explanation, you are simply no longer on the list. The Beckhams, Oprah. The Clooneys, total loyalty, right up until, rather suddenly, it stops. And I want to draw a connection here that I do not think is obvious, because it explains why this pattern keeps repeating rather than being a run of unrelated fallings out. Think about how a certain kind of high-stakes relationship actually works, the kind built around a single, enormously valuable asset. Early on, everyone is thrilled to be near it. The asset generates attention, access, reflected status, and being associated with it feels like a gift. But an asset like that has a hidden property. It does not really form partnerships. It forms dependencies. It draws people in by making proximity feel valuable, and then, slowly, the relationship reorganizes itself around what those people can provide to sustain the asset. Money, cover, credibility, their own reputations lent out as collateral. And there always comes a moment where the person realizes that the warmth they felt was, at least in part, a function of their usefulness. The Beckhams reached that moment, Oprah reached it, and the reason Elton is the most devastating name on that list is that his usefulness was never supposed to be the point. His bond predated all of it. He was the one relationship that was supposed to be pure loyalty rather than utility. And if even that one reorganized itself, quietly, into a question of what he could fund, then the pattern is not a series of coincidences, it is a structure. Elton, according to a large portion of the current commentary, is simply the biggest and most emotionally significant name yet to discover that this particular friendship runs warm right up until it meets a very specific, apparently non-negotiable limit. So, where does Meghan actually fit into all of this, given how directly it touches her own household? The word reportedly coming out of California is that she is genuinely angry. Harry pursued this legal case at all, watching from 5,000 miles away as her husband burned through both money and relationships across the same several weeks. Whether that specific detail holds up under scrutiny is difficult to say from the outside with any real confidence. But it is worth noting that she was in no apparent hurry to stand beside him during what has been described repeatedly as one of the worst weeks of his adult public life. And there is a quiet echo in that absence that I do not think is accidental, because it rhymes with the larger pattern. The empty seat in the London courtroom, the wife 5,000 miles away, the friend who will not return the call, the wealthy contacts who kept their wallets shut. Line them up and they all point in the same uncomfortable direction. This was a week defined not by what happened to Harry, but by who was not there for it. A man who built his entire public identity around the idea that he was surrounded by a loving, chosen family, an antidote to the cold institution he left, spent the hardest week of his adult life conspicuously, visibly alone. The people are still technically in his life. Nobody has issued a statement. Nobody has formally walked away. But presence is a decision people make in the hard weeks, not the easy ones. And in this particular hard week, an awful lot of the presence simply was not there. Now, one thing I genuinely will not do anywhere in this is mock or diminish the specific man Harry reportedly approached for money during all of this. Elton John, at 78, is losing his sight. He has said so himself, plainly, and without any self-pity attached to the disclosure. Picture the two of them side by side for a moment. A half-blind man in his late 70s, quietly managing his own declining health. And the grandson of a queen arriving at his door asking for another check on top of an already enormous existing bill. That image sits at the genuine center of this entire story, and it does not flatter the person doing the asking. And I want you to run a small, honest thought experiment with me, because I think it clarifies exactly why this one lands so differently from every other Harry story you have heard this year. Imagine for a moment that you are 78. Your eyesight is going, and you know it. And you have made a certain uneasy peace with the shape of the years you have left. You have spent nearly 3 decades quietly looking out for the son of a friend you loved and lost, asking for nothing back, showing up at his wedding, defending him in public, lending your name to his causes. And then that son talks you into a legal fight that cost you millions you did not need to spend. And before the dust has even settled, before you have finished absorbing that blow, he calls again. Not to apologize, not to check on your health, to ask for more. Now be honest with yourself. At what point in that exact sequence would you have said the words, "I am not an ATM"? Because I suspect for most of us, the answer is that we would have reached that point considerably sooner than Elton did, which reframes him not as the friend who finally gave up, but as the friend who held on far longer than almost anyone reasonably would have. Here is the part of all of this that I genuinely think should stay with you, long after the specific £50 million figure itself has faded from memory and been replaced in the news cycle by whatever comes next. Harry has lost court cases before and recovered without lasting damage. What he appears to have lost this specific month, if even part of this reporting is accurate, is something considerably harder to replace. The last person alive who loved him purely for being Diana's son. Think about that phrase, because it is the whole thing. With nothing tied to the brand, nothing tied to the Netflix deal, nothing tied to the marriage attached to that affection, Elton John was, by every account of this 3-decade relationship, the final living thread connecting Harry back to his actual mother, someone who held him through grief as a boy, who sang her into the ground in front of the watching world, who repeatedly staked his own name and reputation on Harry's behalf across 30 consistent years. And what is now being discussed openly is that Harry apparently burned through even that, drew an elderly man into a legal catastrophe that never needed to happen, and then reportedly asked him for more money on the way out the door. Think honestly for a moment about how many individual decisions made across how many separate years by multiple different people genuinely have to go wrong in sequence for any story to arrive at a point exactly like this one. Diana's closest surviving friend, the single most reliable and generous person that boy ever had access to, apparently deciding, quietly and without drama, that enough is finally enough. And I want to be very clear about what this was not, because Harry's own instinct will understandably be to point outward. This was not something done to him by the press. It was not the palace either. And it was not the tabloid he has spent years publicly blaming for so much of what has gone wrong across his adult life. This is a 78-year-old man who can barely see, quietly closing a door that had remained open, without interruption, since 1997. The man who sang at Diana's funeral is apparently not willing to serve as her son's personal line of credit. Now, let me close the loop I opened at the very beginning, because I promised you I would. I told you the real question was never why Elton said no. It was what that no reveals about everything that came before it. And here is the answer, in full. It reveals that the pattern was always there. The getting marled, as the commentary now calls it, the warmth that runs hot right up until it meets a request that crosses a line. The Beckhams saw it. Oprah saw it. The Clooneys saw it. The difference is that none of them were Diana's chosen family. None of them sang her into the ground. None of them were named, in a sworn legal statement, as a parental figure. Elton was the one relationship that was supposed to be immune to the pattern because it predated the brand, predated Meghan, predated all of it. It went back to the piano in the Abbey, and the pattern reached him anyway. That is why this is the quietly devastating one. Not because of the money. The money will be argued over at a hearing and eventually settled one way or another. It is devastating because of what it says about the trajectory. If the friendship that started at Diana's funeral could not survive the way Harry now moves through the world, then the honest and uncomfortable question is the one nobody in California seems willing to say out loud. If even Elton John has reached his limit, who exactly is left still willing to hold that particular door open going forward? So I want to hand this question directly to you because I think thoughtful people can reasonably land in different places on it. Has Elton John finally seen something real and genuinely unflattering in who Harry has quietly become over these past several years? Or is a genuinely decent aging man simply being unfairly pulled into a fight and a financial mess that he never should have agreed to join in the first place? Sit with it honestly, because the answer you land on says a great deal about how you read everything that is coming next for this family. And a great deal, I think, is coming next. But whichever way you land, hold on to the one image that I think outlasts every number in this story. Not the 50 million, not the 25 million shortfall, not the 97 dismissed claims. Just a man at a piano in an abbey 28 years ago, singing a woman he loved into the ground, and then quietly deciding her song would never be sung again because it was hers. That man spent the next 3 decades keeping a door open for her son. And the quietest, saddest headline of this entire month is simply that the door, at long last, appears to have closed. Not slammed, closed. Gently and with a kind of exhausted finality by the last person who was ever going to keep it open for free. And once a door like that closes, in a family like this one, it does not tend to open again. Some things you lose in public, at a podium, with a statement, and a bill attached. And some things you lose in a single unanswered phone call, quietly, from a man who simply decided he had given enough. This was the second kind, and that, in the end, is why it is the one that will last.